Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barley.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. I'm Mike Roberts with Bill Barley, our storyteller, and although we've been doing this show for quite a long time, we've somehow managed over those years to never get around to probably the main name in his field, and we're going to do that today.
Yeah, I think it's a real oversight, Mike. Let me give you a little of the background. He was born as Bill McDonald. That name is not familiar, but I can give you a few hints. He was well educated. He was, I think, schooled in courtly manners. There's not much doubt about that. He was a good musician. He had other attributes as well. He liked children. He liked animals. He was very fond of women. He was a good dancer. But he had a fatal flaw. We know him as the hands-up gentleman, Bill Miner. The
most notorious train robber in British Columbia history.
That's right. And before that, a stagecoach robber.
All right. The story of Bill Miner, Bill McDonald. And we'll tell that story right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Today talking about Bill McDonald. We know him better as Bill Miner.
Yep.
But I wonder how a young man in the middle 1800s can be well-educated, well-mannered, and end up a bank robber. How does this connect?
Quirk of fate. Civil War, I think, Mike. And I'll tell you why. He was born in 1847. Father's a landowner, quite a wealthy man, gives him the good education, all the good background. But the Civil War looms up in the early 1860s. He is almost draftable age. His father, we think, sends him west, so he won't be drafted because it was a great slaughter in the United States. So by 1863, Bill Miner is in the West, and he has tried his hand at being a cowboy. He's tried his hand at being a prospector, and finally he graduates to become an express rider.
At 16 years of age?
At 16 years of age.
Okay.
And you know, he's a good express rider. He knows the West, he knows how to ride, he's a natural, but he makes a discovery. What he is carrying is thousands and thousands of dollars in gold or bar or bullion in the express bags, and he's making $1 a day.
This doesn't make financial sense to him.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to him. So by the end of that year, he has graduated. He decides he's going to hold up one of the stagecoaches, and one of the stagecoaches coming out of the motherlode country. That may be Auburn County or Placer County or
California, anyway.
Sure, yeah. California, the hills of California, just teeming with gold, even at that late date. So he does. He successfully boards a stagecoach on an uphill run, which is where the stage slows down to a walk. He gets on board, and being young and inexperienced, he doesn't know what to say. It's usually, you know, throw down the strong box.
Give me your money.
Or give me your money, or whatever. He doesn't even know what to say. He points the gun at him and says, hands up. And much to his astonishment, these two guys put their hands up.
And he's credited with the phrase that is now synonymous with Bill Miner and holding up stages across the West.
For sure.
Hands up.
Yeah, he becomes the hands up bandit or the hands up gentleman because that was accompanied with courtly manners. But by 18 or 19, he has a gang under him. And they acknowledge him as the leader. That's how much command he had. He really had stature on both sides of the law. And so they make a good hit. They make a good hit on a stagecoach coming out of Calaveras County. And they get $75,000. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot today. But when you multiply that and you factor it by 40, it's $3 million, Mike.
This is a big
That's
hit.
right. It is now Bill Miner versus
the Wells Fargo
Wells
Company.
Fargo.
Then those are a formidable opponent, obviously.
Oh, yeah, sure they are. And, you know, Wells Fargo, because they're not only formidable, they have their own detectives, and they're also linked up with the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which is the greatest detective agency in the United States, and was for decades.
And they didn't get famous and trusted by being held up by anybody.
That's right, that's right.
So it's time to get this guy.
So they start tracing it down. One of his Confederates betrays him. He goes to prison. They haven't got a lot on him, so he goes to prison only for 3 years. Okay, 66 to 69. He's let out in about 1869. He's caught again and put back in prison. So this is San Quentin. He goes to San Quentin, which is one of the secure prisons of California. No doubt about that at all. And so by the time he gets out, he gets out in 1869. He goes back to prison. He goes back for 11 years. He gets out in 1880, and he figures California's getting a little bit too hot for him. So he heads for New Mexico and into that Colorado country where he isn't as well known. Teams up with a guy called Leroy, Billy Leroy, okay? Now, Billy Leroy is a well-known bandit, and they stop a stage coming out of Del Norte in Colorado, and they hold it up for $3,600. They were looking for more, that's all they got. Now, $3,600's a significant hold-up in those days. And they're so hotly pursued by a posse under a guy called Armstrong that they split. And when they split routes, Miner has the cash and Leroy has nothing. Now, it wasn't done intentionally because they were Confederates. They were going to split it up. But anyway, they never get together again. And Miner was lucky. He escaped, and so did Leroy. But Leroy goes back to the well once too often. A couple of months later, he teams up with his brother. He goes back and tries the Del Norte stage again. He robs it. This time, the posse catches him quickly. They put him in prison. A vigilante mob breaks in. They take Leroy and his brother out, and they hang him high. Judge Lynch passes the final sentence on these guys. So now Bill Miner goes back to the Midwestern states into Michigan and lays low for a while, but he can't resist the lure of California. So back he comes to California. This time he teams up with a guy called Stanton Jones, and they go back into that high country again. Now Stanton Jones is a well-known robber, Mike, and he's pretty clever. He isn't as clever as Bill Miner, but he's pretty clever. And there's a sheriff there, a guy called Armstrong, again, who is very, 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 very tough to shake. So they hold up a stagecoach. They do fairly well, but Armstrong tracks them down. With the posse, they corner him, and they trap them both. Miner, who was kind of an interesting guy, never wanted to kill a man, and never did through his entire career. Now, that's interesting. Yeah. This is as close as he ever came. So they capture Miner, they capture Stanton Jones, and they truss them up like chickens. They search them first, you see, and they truss them up like chickens. Midnight comes, and here's Miner sitting there by the campfire, and the sheriff, the deputy sheriff, another deputy sheriff are sitting asleep, and the guard standing over Miner. Miner reaches down inside his pant leg and pulls out another revolver and reaches across the campfire and points to this guy, and his hands are still trussed. And he said, "You'd better take this off." Well, the guy does exactly as he's told. He takes the ropes off and whatever else maybe it was wire, it's hard to tell. Yeah. And the same thing with Jones, and they're going to sneak away. Jones trips on something and wakes up the sheriff. Now here it is, almost midnight in the High Sierra. Miner gets off 4 shots. His first shot breaks Armstrong's arm. His second shot breaks the shoulder of one of the deputies, and his third shot hits him in the other arm, and the fourth shot incapacitates the other deputy. Then he makes his escape.
Now, is this good shooting or good fortune that he didn't murder anybody on that occasion?
In all the years where there was any gunplay involved, he never shot to kill. Now, that's very interesting, you know. This guy had some interesting attributes. I mean, he was a bandit, he was a thief, but, you know, he had other things.
He wasn't a killer.
That's right, and he wasn't a bigot even. You know, I mean, even in those days, he wasn't a bigot. He didn't mind the Chinese, didn't mind the blacks and so on. But he figures by now, it's getting a little too hot for him.
I would say.
Okay. So what he does, of course, is he makes 1 or 2 more attempts in California. They capture him again. 1880. He goes back, 1881 actually, he goes to prison. He goes back to prison, San Quentin again, for 21 years, Mike. 21 years. He comes out of San Quentin. It's now 1902. He's now into his 50s. And he says, that's it. No more San Quentin. So he decides to head for the deep Northwest. And the deep Northwest is Washington and Oregon. And there he has some sisters. And so he drifts northward into Washington and Oregon, and then we come to the final chapter of his story.
All right, and we'll do that, his British Columbia chapter, when we come back from this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We're talking about Bill Miner today, only now that he's moved into British Columbia, or into Whatcom County in northern Washington State, he goes by another name entirely.
Yeah, he goes by a name of Morgan in Washington State. and Bill Morgan. But then he drifts northward, and he drifts northward for a reason. We don't know at first why he drifted northward. Nobody knew. And he drifts into an old town called Princeton, which is on that upper Similkameen country. And there he stays with a rancher, and he says he wants peace and quiet. And I'm inclined to believe him. He spent over 30 years in prison already, you see. So he does want peace and quiet. And but soon after, there's a robbery near Silverdale, which is right close to Mission Junction, or Mission now.
Down in the Fraser Valley.
In the Fraser Valley. And this is in, what, 1904. And they rob a train there, 3 of them. Bill Miner is certainly one, because the engineer turns around and hears somebody behind him, and the guy says, hands up.
The calling card.
Sure, soft southern drawl, so the guy puts his hands up, stops the train. The guy loots the express car. He's looking for $62,000 in cash, or actually in gold. He didn't get it. It was on another train. But he did get $6,000 in gold, $1,000 in currency, and $50,000 in bearer bonds, which is rather interesting.
Is that as good as cash?
Yeah, bearer bonds almost as good as cash if you're careful,
okay,
because you can sell them to other people and fence them off, you see. So he makes his escape. And nobody knows really who this is, because this is now on the Canadian side. This is not Pinkerton jurisdiction. This is not Wells Fargo jurisdiction at this particular time. So it passes off. But in 1905 of the next year, there's a big robbery of a Great Northern train near Portland. Oh, excuse me, near Seattle. This one was near Seattle. There was another abortive attempt near Portland. And he takes $30,000, Mike. Now, $30,000 multiplied by 40, $1.2 million. Now the Pinkertons are on it. And they interrogate all the individuals on the train, the conductor and the engineer and the brakeman and all the rest. Bill Miner has all the handiwork of Bill Miner. All the signs are there.
Heard the words before.
That's right.
Yeah.
But he disappears again.
Yeah.
And even the Pinkertons can't find him. Now this time he goes back into Princeton, Mike. He goes back into Princeton, and he goes to visit what was purportedly an old friend of his, a guy called Jack Budd. Now Jack Budd is not Jack Budd. Jack Budd is a broken-down cowboy. I talked to a lot of people who knew him, and he came from the South, but his real name is Jack McDonald.
Bill McDonald, Jack McDonald, brothers.
Right. He is Bill Miner's brother. And he may have been on the run, too. He had a little ranch northeast of Princeton, so Bill Miner holds up there with Jack Budd. And within a few months, now 1906 is approaching, within a few months, a couple of other drifters come in. One is a cowboy, kind of an itinerant cowboy, Shorty Dunn. Kind of a bit of a wild guy. The other one's cut from a different cloth, Louis Calhoun, ex-school teacher. Had tuberculosis, sent west to get rid of tuberculosis, hoping he will survive, Mike, hoping he will survive, which he does, but he teams up with Miner. That's a significant mistake. And now Miner, he's out prospecting for a C.P.R. train again, okay? A little low on cash, So he decides, and he hears that there's about $60,000 coming down on a C.P.R. train that's heading west. And he has it all figured out. He watches the C.P.R. trains go through. He's got it all timed. He knows they stop at a little place called Ducks, which is east of Kamloops, near Monty Creek, and along that South Thompson River, all through that Douglas Lake Cattle Company. You know, it's very, very nice, open country. It's it's marvelous country. So anyway, in 1906, he teams up with these two guys. They let the people in the town and the ranches nearby that they're going on a prospecting trip. Indeed, they are. So they head north into that Ducks country, and the train comes by at the right hour, getting on towards midnight. It stops at Ducks to pick up some water, I guess, but they pick up something else. They pick up 2 unexpected passengers.
Unwelcome, too,
yes,
from the C.P.R.'s point of view.
And not paying as well, okay? And same old thing, and the noise behind him turns around, the guy has a revolver leveled at his head, says, just pull her up to mile 116, he says, and just park her there. So the engineer does exactly as he's told. When you're looking down the barrel of a Colt revolver or a Remington revolver, you're going to do exactly as you're told. He pulls it up to 116. Another man comes running across the field. That may have been Miner, it may not have been. He's carrying dynamite. He says, cut off the express car. But by mistake, they don't cut off the express car. They cut off the baggage car. That's a real mistake. A mistake Miner did not usually make, but it was a mistake.
Yeah.
So they proceed to get into the baggage car, realize, and now the train has gone on ahead, so now they realize that they have the baggage car and not the express car. The express car is with the main train, which is, you know, gross error. and
this is a bad piece of work.
It's a bad day. And he gets $15. He passes up 40,000.
He holds up a train for $15.
Right. 2 registers letters contain $15, probably $10 in one and $5 in another. He passes up $40,000 in currency, which was all signed and ready to go. And it was on flat little packages on a little shelf, and just didn't look important. It wasn't even put away. It wasn't, you know, the C.P.R. at that particular case was not too careful about it, and he overlooked it. So they finally realize it's a botched job. They head for the woods. They get their horses, which they had borrowed from another rancher, by the way, and they head back towards that Douglas Lake cattle country, which is, there's an old ranch in there. The Douglas Lake Cattle Company is an old ranch, 1860s, actually, Mike. And so they go through that country, which is south of Kamloops. And the word, of course, as soon as the train hits Kamloops, the word is out. And they send telegraphs out to Pinkertons, to the warden of San Quentin, to the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, the BC Provincial Police, and they're all on their trail. As luck would have it, Miner's a little bit lucky, Mike, because it's absolutely pouring cats and dogs. And the dogs they put out after Miner, of course, lose the trail. Yeah. But there's one very smart BC provincial policeman, a guy called William Fernie, and he figures, where would Miner go? So he heads out along that Douglas Lake cattle country in there, and he comes across some tracks that are not familiar. And he tracks them for 72 hours. And finally, he thinks they're in a little thicket.
Is this Fernie all by himself or with a
Fernie's all by himself.
Oh, he's all by himself.
That's right. He comes into the thicket, and he looks, and he creeps up to it, and he sees that there are 3 men there. He says, he figures they're Miner and Shorty Dunn and Louis Kaufman. So he goes back and picks up the Royal Northwest Mounted Police.
And is this the photo of them with all of these people all gathered together?
Yeah, these are part of the posses, yes.
That's quite a herd of them. They all look eager to go here.
Oh, sure. This is a great manhunt. I mean, this is one of the great manhunts of British Columbia. There's not much doubt about it, Mike. That they're ready to go. They have the dogs and all the straight brim Stetson hats and all the rest of it. And so he picks up the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. They surround these guys, and they come in and they say, this Edwards or Bill Miner's a very cool guy.
Yeah.
And they say, you're under arrest. He says, no, I'm not. He says, my name's George Edwards. He says, and that was the name he was going by in Princeton, of course. And he said, my name's George Edwards. I'm a rancher. And he said, I'm just doing a little prospecting. These are my 2 companions. The guy says, you're under arrest anyway. Well, Edwards tries to bluff out of it, or Miner.
Yeah.
But what happens? Shorty Dunn hits the panic button, charges away, firing shots at the police as he goes. And, of course, they bring him down with 1 shot. And the jig's up.
The jig's up.
Sure. They put the cuffs on Miner, and when they put the cuffs on him, they notice there's a tattoo, and the tattoo is of a dancing girl. And that's one of the giveaway tattoos. They know they've got not George Edwards, not another bandit. They've got the notorious Bill Miner. And what happens, of course, they bring him back into Kamloops, and here's a great shot, Mike.
What a parade.
Yeah, of the parade, and they're stopping to have their picture taken, their photograph taken. And here's the wagon covered with blankets and so on, because it's pouring down, just pouring down rain. And there's Miner, and there's Calhoun, and there's Shorty Dunn in the wagon. And they eventually go right on to Kamloops itself, and then the great trial takes place. Okay. And the great trial is very interesting. When they come down, it's almost a celebration when they come down the main street of Old Kamloops. And Old Kamloops at the turn of the century looks something like this. Now, we haven't got a shot of that, but this is what the town looks like. But there are 1,000 people out there.
They've all come strictly for the show. They want to see
Moccasin Telegraph has said these guys are captured, and they want to see it. And so they go into the courtroom, and of course the courtroom is absolutely jammed with people. There are probably 150 people with the presiding judge. But they make a mistake. They impanel a jury, Mike. And the jury is kind of interesting because the head of the jury is a guy called Morrow. And Morrow is a Kamloops guy. He's a rancher. And he has a resemblance to Bill Miner. And he had expressed the belief that no poor man should ever go to jail.
No poor man should ever go to jail.
So anyway, the judge comes down, and they've got him cold. They had people who recognized him on the train, and of course Shorty Dunn trying to escape, and the tattoo, and all the rest of them. They got him cold. Jury comes back, hung jury, and they say, I can't believe it. 7 wanted to convict and 5 didn't, and they're immovable. And they asked one of the reporters asked one of these jurymen. He said, well, why didn't you convict him? Oh, he says, that's easy. He says, the C.P.R. holds us up every day. Bill Miner only holds them up once or 2 years. He shouldn't be jailed for that, right?
This obviously was a court case that needed to be retried.
Oh, sure.
And it was.
Sure. They impanel another jury, and the other jury they picked very carefully. They come down with a guilty verdict in just a few minutes. So Bill Miner is given life imprisonment in the British Columbia Penitentiary. Very tough to get out, as are the other two, Louis Calhoun and Shorty Dunn. And so they go to the BC Pen, but inside of a year, Bill Miner has managed to convince the daughter of the warden that he's going straight. So they give him a break, and they let him work outside in the brickyard, and of course he managed to dig a little hole under that fence, and in just a few minutes, one nice sunny day, he's through that hole like a rabbit with 3 others. Now they capture the other 3. They don't capture Bill Miner. He disappears. He probably goes up into that Similkameen country, down across the line in the South Similkameen, and he goes right back to Georgia. And you know what happened, Mike? And really what happens is he continues robbing trains in Georgia. He goes to prison, he escapes. He goes to prison, he escapes again. He goes to prison, he escapes again. Finally, in 1913, he dies in prison in Milledgeville, Georgia. And that was the one death he didn't want. But, you know, it's kind of interesting, because even at that, and he was an old age pensioner by that time, even at that advanced age, Mike, he really had some friends. The owner of the funeral parlor in that town decided that he shouldn't be buried in a pauper's grave, which usually happened to prisoners. Yeah. Okay? And so he arranged for a full funeral, and the Episcopalian minister, he presided over it. And a bunch of people came, and they dressed him up in brand new clothes, which they thought he deserved. And another thing they did, later on, at that particular time, they put a headstone on his, but later on, a much more elaborate headstone was put on his grave. The unfortunate part, he died in 1914, not 1913.
So he, over his entire life, like a senior citizen, half of it spent in jail.
Yeah.
And the other half of it growing up and then robbing trains. His entire life. But he still managed to be a person who's had a demeanor which made people like him.
Sure. I remember old Mrs. Alice Wright saying, my heavens, and she died a few years ago. I knew her quite well. She was one of the Allisons. And she said, he had nice manners, and he was a divine dancer.
God's sake.
You know? So he really made a mark on people.
And here Bill Miner lived in this area, just to the in the Douglas Lake country for a while, Princeton for a while, Kamloops for a while, the premier train robber of Canada.
No doubt about it.
Okay. Any of this loot, did he spend it all, or is it lurking around somewhere?
They think, there's a story out of Princeton. 2 individuals came into Princeton in the 1920s. They'd been working on the Bud Ranch. They sat down to have a beer in the Princeton Hotel, and several locals are there with them, and they paid for their beer in old Canadian banknotes, Mike. And where they got them, we don't know. There are people in that area convinced that there's still some of Bill Miner's treasure buried on the Bud Ranch, which is northeast of Princeton.
The story of Bill Miner today on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns, and we thank you for watching. Don't forget to join us again next time. See you then.